Ron Paul, candidate for the Libertarian Party's nomination for President of the United States. Why are you running for president?
I think that the American people are sick and tired of what they've been getting for the last 40 or 50 years. They asked Reagan to straighten out the mess, and it got much worse. It's time we have somebody that they can trust to reduce the size of government and really restore freedom in this country.
Now, at this point, presidential campaigns do get a lot of attention, but almost all of that attention is on the 14 or so Republicans or Democrats who are running. Very little attention to a Libertarian candidate. Realistically, do you have any chance of being elected?
Probably not now, but realistically, having an influence in the election, I think, is very, very good. And someday we must have a Libertarian president, or we won't have freedom in this country. That's how strongly we as Libertarians feel. But it's going to depend on a lot. It's going to depend on us. The strength of the views is there. Whether or not we can wake up the American people to what the Libertarian philosophy is all about is the challenge that we have. But as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely necessary.
Good day. You're watching Road to the White House, C-SPAN's weekly look at the presidential campaigns each Friday at 5 and Sunday at 9:30. We take an hour and a half to look at what the announced and unannounced candidates for president are doing and saying around the country. Most of you are probably most familiar with the Democrats and Republicans who are running, and today we're going to introduce you to a Libertarian, one of several Libertarians who is running for president. He's former Congressman Ron Paul. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He earned his BA degree from Gettysburg College and his MD from Duke University Medical School. He was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 1976, and he served 4 terms representing the Houston area of Texas. In 1984, he ran in the Republican Senate primary against now Senator Phil Gramm. He lost, and then in February of this year, switched parties and is now a candidate for the Libertarian Party's nomination for President of the United States. How many other people are running for the Libertarian Party's nomination?
Tell you what, I'm not positive because a lot of times you have minor candidates, but there could be as many as 3 or 4.
Now, you are currently also a practicing gynecologist,
That's
is
right.
that
That's
correct?
right. I practice medicine in Texas right now.
So since you lost in '84, that has been primarily what you've been doing?
I've been doing that, and I also put out an investment type of letter because I've been always fascinated with the hard money school, and I've been interested in the gold standard, so I put out an investment letter along those lines.
Now, you've switched parties. You were a Republican, and now you're a Libertarian. Why did you switch, and what's the difference between those two?
Well, there's a lot of difference between what we intend to do and what's been done. Actually, Ronald Reagan satisfied a lot of conservative libertarians over the years. I was a supporter of Ronald Reagan in the 70s and even in 1980, hoping that something would be done. Ronald Reagan hasn't been frightened by the word libertarian. He has even quoted the libertarian economists. But a libertarian believes in reducing the size of government and getting rid of the deficit. And remember, Ronald Reagan was pretty good on the deficit in his speeches. But look at what's happened. It's a tragedy. And if anybody's concerned, and I believe they are, we have to do something. But a $200 billion deficit is in the midst of bankrupting this country. So a new approach has to be done. And that was the major decision I made at the beginning of this year, that I gave up finally on the Republican alternatives and the Republican approach to cutting back. It's worse than ever, and now the conservatives are the liberal Democrats. They're yelling and shouting at the big spending Republicans. There's an opportunity available for somebody who will tell the truth and somebody that'll be believable, and I have a believable record. I spoke this same language as I ran for office, and I voted this way. I voted against all big government.
So then is it safe to say that the Libertarian position is less government or no government?
Less government. There's a few, of course, in any movement that will have more extreme views, and there are some who would like to see no government, but that is not the position of the party, and it's never been the position of the platform. It's for very limited government, but across the board. We'd like to put freedom back together again. Freedom's been chopped up in the 20th century. The Founding Fathers had a pretty good grasp of the freedom principle. The individuals ought to be free to lead their own lives, the market ought to be free, and we ought to mind our own business. In the 20th century, the conservative Republicans have tended to defend freedom of the marketplace pretty well, and liberal Democrats do pretty well in defending civil liberties, allowing people to have their own lifestyle. They're both wrong on foreign policy because they just want to go around the world and meddling all the time. So we'd like to put it all together again. Have free markets, individuals ought to be free with regards to civil liberties, and we ought to have a non-interventionist, armed neutrality type of foreign policy.
Now let's go back to when you announced you were switching parties and that you would be a candidate for the Libertarian Party's nomination. Your Campaign sent out a press release, and the title was Ron Paul Denounces the Reagan Imperial Presidency. Why do you call him an imperial president?
Well, imperial means basically to me that it's expansionist. I guess right now the best example of an imperial president would make the assumption that all you have to do to secure peace in the Persian Gulf is to ask Kuwait to put on an American flag and then send American tax dollars, American boys over to defend these ships in the midst of a war zone. No wonder the ships are being sunk and shot at. I mean, that's imperialistic. We have no more obligation to protect the wealth of Kuwait or the interests of Exxon than the man on the moon. I mean, those ships should be here protecting of America. So that's imperialistic.
Are you an isolationist?
No, as a matter of fact, the free market is exactly opposite of isolation. I mean, open borders, free trade, let the people come and go, let the goods flow over the borders. It is withdrawn when it comes to military aggression and involvement in the internal affairs of other nations. Some people would like to label that in a negative sense, the way that's isolationism. But what we're having today is leading to militarism and isolationism, exactly as it did in the 30s. Trade breaks down when we mess up our currencies, and then it becomes more militaristic and nationalistic. So that's the type of isolationism that I don't like. We like open borders, let the people and the goods flow back and forth.
What about Central America? If you were elected president, would you have U.S. money or men working in specifically Nicaragua?
No, certainly not, and certainly not the way it's being done now. I mean, that's a vicious abuse of power. It's unconstitutional, it's immoral, and has nothing to do with stopping communism. That's a facade. If they were anxious to stop communism, they would immediately stop funding to the communists in the Soviet bloc nation, including the Soviet Union. I mean, under Reagan, the strong anti-communist is now funding the Soviet Union. At the same time, we're going to stand tough against communism in Central America. It's a fake and a fraud. If they were serious, they'd stop all the funding right now. This idea that we can stop communism in Grenada while ignoring what's happening in Cuba doesn't make any sense. As long as we're continuing to fund the communists, it's nothing more than a charade in order to subsidize the military-industrial complex.
If you were elected president, how would you handle the arms race? How would you deal with the Soviet Union in reducing nuclear weapons?
Well, we would neutralize the confrontation. Today it was reported that one of our ships went into the Soviet waters. We'd get out of the Persian Gulf, we'd back off, we'd bring all our troops home, we'd bring all our missiles home, we'd defend America. And we wouldn't, anytime they threatened us, we'd defend ourselves. We'd have armed neutrality. But we would reduce the number of nuclear bombs maybe by 75%. We wouldn't get rid of them, but we'd drastically reduce them. We'd do away with the confrontation, but stand firm and sure of ourselves. We wouldn't go in half-heartedly into anything, such as we did in Vietnam, to lose 60,000 men in a no-win undeclared war. That is complete nonsense and the result of the Republican Democratic foreign policy of 50 years. And it's going to continue, it's going to get worse.
Would you then pull also out of NATO?
Absolutely. France is out of NATO, and they're a better ally than ever, and they take care of themselves. Why do we pay $130 billion a year to take care of Europe? $50 billion subsidy to Japan. Completely insane. Yeah, we'd get out of NATO. Who was for not getting into NATO? Mr. Republican himself, Robert Taft. Senator Robert Taft said it was foolish to get in NATO. It eventually would hurt our defenses, get us involved in a war, and bankrupt us. And he was right, and that's what we're seeing today. We ought to get out of there, let Germany take care of themselves. I mean, we're broke. Even if we didn't agree, if the American people don't agree on the moral and the constitutional argument, they have to agree we're broke. The Libertarians offer the only compromise. The compromise is you cut military spending with a change in policy, and you cut welfare spending in order to get this deficit back. Instead, the Republicans compromise with the Democrats, and they get together and they raise domestic spending and they raise military spending. That's why you have your $200 billion deficit.